The Raccoon City Police Department is one of the 20 realms in Dead by Daylight. Currently, it features two separate maps, RPD East Wing and RPD West Wing. Even though the realm has only been in the game for a little bit more than 2 years now, it has already received multiple very significant changes, including completely reworking the original map into two separate ones, along with a few other smaller tweaks. So in this video we'll be going over the entire history of RPD in Dead by Daylight, and without any further ado, let's get right into it. Let's go back in time to the summer of 2021. Dead by Daylight had just had its 5-year anniversary and a lot of new players had begun playing the game. Why? Well, that was because the anniversary update included the first ever Resident Evil chapter, which brought the Nemesis Jill Valentine, Leon S. Kennedy, and the infamous RPD map. The original RPD featured gloomy hallways, quite a bit more mist and very moody lighting, although not as dark as in the concept art. Even though one of the outdoor areas wasn't added into the game yet, this was an absolutely humongous map, since it was made up of both the east and west side simultaneously. Not only that, but many of the pallets and window vaults on the map back then were much stronger than they are now. For example, in the east office, the hole in the wall that connects it to the press room and that is commonplace in today's RPD didn't exist, which meant that the window vault was incredibly safe, even safer than the God window in the main building of the Garden of Joy map. Additionally, the table around the pallet in the east office was also much bigger, which basically made this a God pallet as well. So, to recap, the east office featured a God window and a God pallet simultaneously. At least, the window in here was a bit weaker compared to today, but who am I kidding, no one uses it anyway. Mind you, this is only one example of the many resources on this map that were much stronger back then. Even though the developers had added quite a bit of new doorways and holes that weren't present in the Resident Evil games, it was still clear that the map wasn't very well suited for DBD gameplay. And since it was a very faithful replication of the Raccoon City Police Station from the Resident Evil 2 remake, players were quick to realize that it didn't feel very good to play on at all. Excluding of course the utterly incredible visuals, which without a doubt are absolutely mesmerizing. In fact, on the PTB, console players were literally unable to play on RPD, since their game would crash every time they loaded into the map. Back when the original RPD was released, Scott Junt made a video calling it the worst map in Dead by Daylight. And to be fair, his arguments were quite reasonable. In the video, he made the conclusion that it takes the same amount of time to go from one side of the map to the other as on Mother's Dwelling, which at that time was the biggest map in the game. Not only that, but RPD also had many other problems, including the claustrophobic aspects of indoor maps, not being able to find generators as a survivor, and literally being unable to use your power as killers like for example Billy. Furthermore, the map also had a third floor, which was accessible by going up the stairs in the library, and this exact fact would begin to cause major problems when the 5.5.0 update was released. With the 5.5.0 patch in early 2022, the developers introduced a buff to the perk Boil Over. New effect: you gain 25% wiggling progress when the killer drops from great heights. Now, this on paper doesn't seem that great. However, this was considered one of the most controversial changes in DBD's history. Why? Well, because some maps featured places where the killer was required to drop down after picking up a downed survivor, the Boil Over perk was very easily abusable. Spots like this were, for example, the second floor on the main building of the Crotespren Asylum and, you guessed it, the library in RPD. Along with that, survivors would also bring petrified oak offerings to make sure that no hooks spawned on the top floor. This was absolutely awful for killers, since players usually brought Boon Exponential to make sure that they also couldn't be slugged, which resulted in an infinite loop of killers not being able to hook survivors. Things needed to change, but guess what? Instead of actually nerfing Boil Over, the developers just chose to add another hook spawn to the upper part of the library. And rightly so, they received quite a bit of backlash for that. Thankfully, 2 patches later, Boil Over was finally nerfed to how it is today. However, there were still many glaring problems with RPD, and players were becoming increasingly more frustrated. It was clear that a big rework of the map was needed, and fortunately, Behavior had been listening to the community. On the 2nd of August 2022, the Raccoon City Police Station was mysteriously renamed to RPD East Wing. Players were quick to speculate that the map would possibly be receiving a rework, and these speculations turned out to be correct. This was an intentional leak by the developers, confirming that the map was going to be split into two separate ones. On the 30th of August 2022, the Resident Evil Project W chapter was released to the public, and with this also came the long-awaited changes to the Raccoon City map. Moving forward, RPD would now be separated into two smaller maps, built around the west and east wing, experiencing a considerable reduction in size. The main hall, however, would still be featured on both maps, retaining its original layout. Furthermore, a new outdoor area to the realm was added, which prior to that was completely blocked off and inaccessible to the players. Additionally, several new halls and entrances were added that were previously missing from the original map. These included a hole in the wall of the library, a hole in the east office, and many more. Moreover, several corridors were widened to make navigation easier, and the infamous top part of the library was made completely inaccessible, outright removing the third floor from the map. All of these changes were great. However, players were a little disappointed with this rework, since they expected that the original map would be completely split in half, which wasn't necessarily the case. In fact, some players even claimed that with the new outdoors area, the East Wing and West Wing maps were almost the same size as the original RPD. Well, at least several pallets were weakened, including the one between the West Office and the Records Room, and the one in the East Office. Speaking of the East Office, the new hole in the wall also significantly weakened the strength of the window vote, which went from the strongest God window in the game to being slightly weaker than the one in Longwood Jungle Gyms. Furthermore, many pallets also received alternative spawn locations. For example, the pallet in the West Office could now also spawn here, whereas previously its only spawn location was here. Same goes with the pallet in the East Office, although its new variation is like really weak. On the contrary, a new God pallet was added to the top of the staircase in the main hall. Fun fact, in the public test build, there was actually another God pallet right on the other side of the stairs, meaning that there were two God pallets in less than 10 meters of each other. Thankfully, this pallet spawn was removed for the live release, and we only got the one that we currently have today. There was still, however, one big problem with RPD that needed to be addressed: 3genning. Prior to the Project W chapter, Dead by Daylight received a massive meta shakeup. Many of the previously popular generator defense perks got nerfed pretty significantly, and because of the new buffs to other gen-related killer perks, the generator kicking meta started to arise, and the 3-gen strategy was becoming more and more popular. This issue became even worse when the Knight and the Skull Merchant got released, and RPD was one of the main offenders of their main strategy, since sometimes a total of 3 generators would spawn in the main hall, and the fact that they were so close to each other meant that they could very easily be defended even with only 2 gen defense perks. Survivors were becoming increasingly more frustrated with this boring playstyle, and things needed to change. So, thankfully, many of the strongest killer perks at the time, such as Call of Brine and Eruption, received very significant nerfs, and the generator spawns in the main hall of RPD got changed in order to not be able to generate such busted setups. Ever since these reworks, I believe that the Raccoon City Police Department has received no further changes, though I may be wrong. Let me know if I missed anything down in the comments, I would really appreciate it. Well, I guess that was it. We went through the entire history of RPD in Dead by Daylight. I've started introducing more music into my videos instead of just having the DBD theme playing all the way through. Let me know if you like it or not. But anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!